Welcome to the Scaleup Valley podcast, where we bring the best leaders in the world to help you scale from 1 million to 100 million, from 100 million to 1B, and from 1B to 1 as you know, we are in a very different context nowadays. It's not a very good topic to talk about scaling up in the present crisis that we are all living. So it's much more about how to navigate during war times and how to keep everyone on the same page as we defeat this pandemic crisis that we are facing nowadays. So to discuss how to help our companies survive and go through this crisis, we have a very special guest. His name is Alexandre Santos, the investment director at Sonae Investment Management and the co-founder and chief investment officer at Bright Pixel. Alexandre, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite.
That's awesome, and especially you are the one who is starting this special season about wartime, and we always discuss this rule of the triple 2 times and double 3 times, especially on the road from 1 million to 100 million. So assuming that we are able to achieve the 2 million mark and then triple to 6 million and then 18 million and then double from 18 to 36, 36 to 72, and 72 to 244. But I would say that today we would need to shift. So how are you trying to support your portfolio to navigate this crisis, and what are some of your tips to face this uncertainty that all leaders are facing nowadays?
First of all, we've been on a daily basis talking with all of the the C-level teams that we have in each startup. So we've had several difficult hand-holding conversations, and we're trying to compile a lot of information on our side that can be helpful for the different founders in different stages that we have within our portfolio, because we have early stage startups and later stage startups.
And so maybe we can stop there, and if you just give us a brief introduction about your investment thesis and the characteristics of your portfolio, and a little bit about Sonae Investment Management and Bright Pixel, to be the best way to start the show. Apologies for going straight to the
So stepping back a little bit, Sonae Investment Management was created in late 2015. And the whole objective of the company is actually to deploy 250 million euros in the market as a tech investor that works independently to its main shareholder and LP, that is Sonae Group. So Sonae Group is a large Portuguese-based company that has businesses in 80 countries around the world, and their main sources of revenue and profitability come from several retail formats and also a telecom operation in Portugal and in Africa. Mm-hmm. And they have businesses in other areas of interest as well, but these are the 2 main sources. And so there was a decision in 2015 to create an independent holding to invest in tech investments a little bit around the world. Sonae Investment Management was created with the mandate to invest in B2B software companies, ideally in growth stage. So ideally from Series B and above, in 3 main areas of interest. So 3 buckets of interest. One is retail tech, another is cybersecurity, and the third is telecom tech. But early on, when we created Sonae Investment Management, I was actually hired to head the initial investment team that we had. We started dwelling and discussing internally that a percentage of the 250 million euros to deploy in the market should also be allocated to early stage. And then 9 months after, we had a baby called Bright Pixel. And so we co-founded Bright Pixel with people that came from the tech space, serial entrepreneurs that launched several businesses in the tech space over their track record and time as professionals. And so Bright Pixel was born with the idea to be a company builder studio with a fund attached to it that could help really early stage startups from several perspectives, not only putting money in their hands, but also helping the entrepreneurs build out their projects. And because of the DNA that we have within Bright Pixel, our angle is a lot helping in tech and product development.
Got it.
And we have a different mandate in terms of investment. So of course we always are also interested in retail tech, cyber, and telecom tech, but we have a more broad investment thesis where we're investing in emerging tech with an early stage. So we try to find projects that have some degree of distinctiveness and barriers to entry from other competitors in the market in terms of product or technology that they're using.
Got it.
And so that's our angle at Bright Pixel. So we can enter from pre-seed and move up to Series A. Typically, after that, we still haven't had a case that Sonae Investment Management picks the bat from there. But the idea is that Sonae Investment Management is the partner of Bright Pixel, one of the major shareholders and LPs in the fund.
Yep.
And Sonae Investment Management ideally enters at Series B, but typically in the last investments, because the Series A's are getting bigger and bigger, some of the investments that Sonae Investment Management does, typically in the US, where the Series A's are on average still bigger than in Europe. They enter at that phase just to start the relationship with growth stage companies at that point in time.
That's perfect, and thanks for the introduction. And in terms of, you were saying that there are in different stages. Maybe today we will focus a little bit more on the portfolio of Sonae Investment Management, because I believe that Bright Pixel is much more the road from 0 to 1 million, so more the starting up stage. So in terms of kind of trying to understand how to navigate the wartime to then target again the double and triple targets that those kind of high growth companies try to reach. So what are some of the situations that you are seeing nowadays during last week and this week that we are all trying to adapt and understanding day by day how to deal in the best way possible with the challenges ahead?
Okay. So, the first internal discussion that we had was, okay, what kind of scenarios should we work on in terms of the impact of COVID in the markets, right? And so we're actually relying in a couple of sources that exist in the market. One interesting framework that is shared by McKinsey is a document that report that they're actually updating on a regular basis, where they talk a little bit of two potential scenarios. Actually, they started with 3, now they're talking about 2. So one that, more or less refers that we can have 3 or 4 bumpy, really bumpy and rocky months, and a more pessimistic scenario that puts a really longer time frame to the whole overall impact that this can have in the markets, right?
Right.
And so we're wrapping our heads around that, first of all, and on a macro perspective, we're closing our ideas of which are the 2 scenarios that we should work on with the startup. And so we had already some initial conversations to that extent with the startups as well to understand what they're sensing. And then we take it from there. So one is, okay, we should map out two different scenarios, one that will have some impact, and another one that can have a really high impact, right?
Right.
And work in terms of how we see the major metrics being affected by these two scenarios. So, a commercial funnel, revenues, several costs items, and of course then cash available in runway, right?
Right.
And so we're starting those discussions with each startup. In parallel, we're working internally in a framework to evaluate the overall impact that this might have in our portfolio. I can talk a little bit about the framework that we're building. With which criteria that we are using, etc.
That's great.
And the weights that we're still discussing. So,
right.
So basically, we're trying to create two index. One is a structural assessment of our companies.
Got it.
Seven criterias, and the other one is a short-term risk assessment of the companies with 4 criterias actually. And then the third relevant issue is the more financial analysis that I just referred to. So what is the current financial health of the company, and the perspectives in these two scenarios in terms of cash runway and how revenues and costs will evolve, right?
Right.
And so then you can have actually a couple of matrix around this, right? And a better way of trying to objectively frame the discussion internally. But because we have to, the worst thing that an investor has to do is take choices, right? We can't help all of them. We have 32 plus companies in the portfolio now, between early stage and growth stage. A little less than half or early stage, and so we're going to have to take options, and it's really hard when you have different investment directors, each managing their own companies, objectively discussing themselves which should we do in each case, right? And so we have to, we're fully aware that if depending of course on how this whole mess follows through in the next weeks, we might have to take really hard decisions of dropping some companies, right, and saying that we can help, right? And that's really tough. And we're preparing ourselves for those discussions as well. Of course, that's the worst case scenario. We don't want to take those decisions, but we have to have a framework in place if and when we have to reach to that point, right? And another thing that we're working on is we're compiling and getting a lot of help from some advisors about several initiatives, in the US, Europe. We have one investment in Asia as well, Israel as well. We have a lot of investments there. And then country by country initiatives where we can better assess what are the instruments that are being announced and how do they actually work, that and to which each startup could go after them, right? And that's in constant flux, right? So we have a smaller team dedicated to that. And the third area that we're starting to discuss, we still don't have a clear idea about that, is what kind of changes should we have in future investment agreements with startups. So is there any type of clauses that we should tweak or change or add in the future, to have to better manage the relationship that we will have to have with the investments that we're going to do, right?
Absolutely.
What kind of additional protections should we have? Is anything relevant to that extent or not?
Trying to learn from the crisis and implementing some risk mitigation measures for the future, right?
Yeah. Then the fourth area of work, we're putting that a little bit on hold in these next days is, okay, as an investor, we also have to be looking out for opportunities within the chaos, right? There might be pockets of opportunities to address
Absolutely.
new investments, right? But that's, the decision that we took is in the next 2 weeks, let's focus on the portfolio. Let's focus on helping the portfolio, understanding what's happening to them, and defining the way we should attack this, right?
Yeah.
In terms of portfolio management.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. We always discuss the three critical ingredients to scale that now needs to be converted to the three critical ingredients to navigate war times. Number one, radical focus. Number two, world-class leadership. And number three, culture of execution, or as I'm now pivoting to, sense of urgency. And I believe that the third one is now guaranteed, because everyone is with a strong sense of urgency with the situation that we are facing. Starting with the first one, you just gave an example of radical focus. So part of the job nowadays is to reduce risk and to just do what needs to be done and to keep the lights up and understand what is going on. I think it was Jack Ma that explained that it's just in times of prosperity that we should go out and try to fix what is going on. But when things are outside are very complicated and we are in a storm, we should get inside home and try to not change too much things and wait for the storm to go away, and then we start fixing things. So how do you assure that the startups or the scale-ups and the executives understand what is going on and start saying even more no to a lot of things nowadays, instead of trying to have those kind of minds of entrepreneurial mindsets, which is, oh, let's maybe try this new project or this new thing. This might be a revenue source at this moment of crisis. So let's pivot totally the company for this. This might be very dangerous, or maybe not. I'm not sure. So what is your perspective on this kind of entrepreneurial minds that now are a little bit concerned about the future and might be changing strategy and even adding more things to do to the roadmap?
Yeah, first of all, it's funny to have. Well, it's not funny, but
right.
It's interesting to have the initial conversations that we had with the CEOs and founders of each company, and see how they are thinking. On average, most of them are highly optimistic by nature, right?
Yeah.
and risk takers. That's why they're founders and CEOs.
Absolutely.
And so, one thing that we try to ask them is, okay, but let's try to structure the approach, right? Let's try to think out scenarios, and of course, it's in your nature not to think that this can really get really bad, but let's think of the worst case scenario and work from there, right? And so let's assume that, for example, you're going to lose all the leads that you have in your sales funnel. What would happen? What would you do? And how do you see any potential churn in the current customer base that you have? So are you already sensing or having clear manifestations from customers that they want to churn? Yes or no? What are you doing? Are you trying to retain them proactively by giving them high discounts, or just throwing the towel? Some already are doing proactive measures to actually to close some of the most they had a lot of them already had deals that were really close to signing, right? And so some of them more proactively than others went after those and said, if you close now, I'll give you a 50% discount, for example. Right. Let's forget the crisis. Let's start. You already said that you wanted to start. You just didn't formally send me the agreement. So I'll give you a special discount. Let's start, right? That's a way of catching, some of those that are loose, right? And in the final stages of the funnel, right? In other cases, we're discussing how should you react to intentions to churn, right? Some already are receiving formal letters or emails saying we're cutting off everything that is not essential, critical for our activity.
Yeah,
and they're on the wrong side of the table, right? And so we're trying to help them define a little bit how they can proactively try to convince them, the customers of not doing that, right? And giving them some months to decide and not decide now, right? Or something like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, then it all depends on the sector exposure that they have and what is the nature of their business, underlying business. Mm-hmm. But we're seeing several trends. A couple of startups that we have, for example, are highly exposed to fashion retailers, and they're deploying technology to fashion retailers, and that I think those are in worse shape because you have several news and we have also inside information that fashion retailers are being highly affected by all of this. Nobody is in a clear state of mind to buy clothes, right?
Absolutely.
They're focused on groceries and health items and other stuff, right? And so, but to the other extent, we have several retail tech investments that are highly exposed to grocery retailers or food retailers, and those are fine.
An opportunity.
Yeah. Or e-commerce players,
Absolutely.
Right? That are also growing, and so each case is a different case, right? So we're trying to map each company's issues and then learn from that and share the most of the information that we can share and believe is useful for others, right?
Yeah. I think that you just touched at a very important point that I've been listening a lot those days, which is kind of trying to validate with data what our perception or our intuition tells us or what we anticipate. That might not be the reality. So just saying, for instance, in terms of sales, that nobody would have the mind to buy anything at this moment. Yes or no? But first, let's validate if this is really the reality before just assuming it and already picking up the phone and believing that the client would not be interested to talk with us, and maybe we should not call because maybe we are just making the client to think that we might be a cost to cut. So it depends on the perspective.
It depends on the nature of each company's business, the product that they have, how essential it is for their end customer, and that's one of the dimensions that we're evaluating in each company. Some are must-haves, others are nice-to-haves, right?
Yeah.
And so that's tough, right? If it's a nice-to-have in a sector that is highly exposed, we have an issue, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And This is again a very good point. So typically, would say that a normal assumption would be that SMEs would suffer much more because of cash issues than enterprise companies. So enterprise companies might be much more stable in those situations. Do you see any trends across your portfolio? So the ones who are more exposed to enterprise customers might navigate this crisis in the best way. Also, because enterprise customers also need more meetings and more processes to start canceling or negotiating contracts. Usually those are more long-term contracts, not so short-term as SME. So in principle, I would say that common sense would say that portfolios that are exposed to enterprise customers would be safer than the ones who are exposed to SMEs. But what is your opinion about that?
Yeah, so most of our companies have more exposure to mid-cap or enterprise companies. Mm-hmm. And only a few have more exposure to SMEs. Then there's a difference between SMEs in Europe versus SMEs in the US. So, SMEs in the US are the size of mid-cap companies in Europe, right? At least a part of that market, right? But I would say, yes, I agree that those that are more exposed to enterprise companies are a little bit more protected, but then you have to also cross that analysis with the sector exposure. For example, besides the examples that I gave of fashion retailers, we have a couple of companies that work with airlines. Whoa!
Right. Wow. Yeah, enterprise doesn't help anyway. Yeah.
So it all depends, right? But yeah, I would say on average, those that are working more with SMEs have a higher risk of having a lot more issues in the short term. I think the effect of within the mid-market and enterprise segments is a little bit more delayed by one of the factors that you referred to. They take a little bit more time to decide, right? In some cases, in most cases. But I think we're going to feel that effect anyways. It depends on those two initial macro scenarios that I referred to. If we believe, if the market starts believing that this is only a matter of 3, 4, 5 months at most, maybe they're gonna refrain from taking more drastic decisions. But if people start believing that the scenario is a lot worse, I think it's gonna be a lot tougher, right?
Yeah. So some takeaways of Radical Focus on the show so far is kind of preparing 2 scenarios, being very realistic. So bring your CFO into the house and keep your optimism to the team and to the speech to the team to keep everyone motivated, but prepare for the worst case scenario and expect for good news. So it's kind of prepare for the worst and aim for the best. Yes. It's kind of and then of course protect revenue that will not affect cash. So cash is king in war times. And third, as you are doing with your portfolio, also a great lesson for executives: don't try to do everything at the same time, because in crisis times it would be even more difficult to get anything done at all. And so moving to the second point, and it's related with this one. Of course, it's world-class leadership and having the right people on the right seats. I've been recommending over LinkedIn in the past days to create a war squad. So what we can't have in a war situation is to have a lot of stakeholders involved in the decision-making process. We need much more an autocratic process and decision-making process, because we don't have time to discuss with 8 or 9 or 10 people to move forward. So I was recommending 3 pillars to that war squad. One for the team, second for customers, and third cash. So this would be the 3 pillars that I was suggesting. So what's your tips on the way CEOs and executives should structure their teams in war times?
Yeah, first of all, I think this is the time that CEOs have to actually, prove that they're
wartime CEOs.
Yeah, the right person to lead, right? And it's tough, right? It's going to be a lonely job for them, right? And I think they have to, in some cases, be prepared to take some decisions by themselves, or only relying on a couple of people that they should rely upon to decide, right? And that's why we're trying to guarantee that they're doing the right analysis beforehand, because when they will have to take the decision, right, it's going to be really a lot of emotion in play. Mm-hmm. And if they have done the exercise beforehand of what kind of levers do I have, when should I decide to cut costs more drastically or not, how can I cut those costs in a meaningful way. If they now more rationally do that exercise now with a couple of people within their team, when in a couple of months' time, if they have to take those decisions, it's going to be a lot easier, because they already did a lot of preempting, right, in terms of work. Right. And then it's more a matter of validating, the initial thoughts that they had now with the information that they will have in a couple of months' time, right? So I totally agree that, for example, in our case, we were creating war squads. We're working in smaller teams to tackle this portfolio management and risk assessment that we're doing, right? Mm-hmm. We're not involving everybody. Of course, we have a couple of meetings one meeting per week where everybody is involved to know what's happening, right? And to guarantee the information flows, right? But to make things happen, we're working in smaller teams, right? And the startups should do the same, right? Working with people remote is an extra challenge because you have to guarantee that people are engaged or well. You should try to talk more often with the teams and with the whole company. But then you should focus in creating small task forces for each issue that you want to tackle with high priority within the company, right? But I also think that one thing that is key is actually to talk with people, because we're, at least in my case, I start working remote earlier because at Sonae Investment Management in Brightpixel we decided to close shop early last week just to test the remote work processes. Yep. And so I've been remote for more than a week already, and that's going to take a toll, right? Physically, psychologically, in all of us, right? Because we're with our families in a confined space, and that will impact productivity of the companies. People are now saying, "Oh, working remote is great because we are more productive." Okay, true if you do that sometimes, right? But we're in war times in really extraordinary circumstances. Anxiety is high. We're with our families at home. It's not that easy, and it's going to become tougher, right, over time. So we have to talk between ourselves, right? We have to guarantee that all employees are well, and try to motivate those that are starting to lose grasp, right, and their grit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And also what I see is overcoming the fear of being fired as well, as a measure of cutting costs, and which makes, for instance, collaboration more complicated between the silos of the company. This is traditionally difficult in good times. In war times, this might be a good way to solve those differences, but at the same time, it might be a way of highlighting those differences and creating wars inside the war, which is not what we don't want at all. So good point. And in terms of, we were getting from radical focus, world-class execution, and you anticipated and you went straight away in the culture of execution, or the sense of urgency. Daily is now the most important rhythm of the company. So weeklies are not enough at all. Monthlies and quarterlies are kind of in the stratosphere at the moment. So it's really day by day and trying to anticipate day by day and pivoting the different forecasts. So doing the exercise, as you were saying in the beginning, but pivoting very quickly the exercise and getting more clarity as we move.
I have a sense that we're all working more, actually, more hours. And actually we had several startups working during the weekend. Because because they felt the need to prepare themselves for what's coming, right, and work on things that during the week it's a lot tougher. So I'm seeing a lot of people working a lot more, right? But that also will have its medium to longer term effect, right? Because you can have some burnouts, right, in the process, right? So we have to be careful of that, right?
Correct. And nowadays, for the companies who struggle to do weeklies or weekly all ends, guys, now it's the time to do at least a weekly all end. So the company can't wait for meeting every single month or every single quarter, because we are in very special times, and at least once a week, people need to be updated about what is going on in the company, as Alexandre was saying, to reduce the levels of anxiety and to giving some security, some safety, some sense of belonging to all people in the company.
That's really true, and you're stressing a very important point. We're doing two, actually. One on Mondays and another one on Fridays.
This is amazing.
Yeah. And in the meantime, for example, our CEO is calling on a regular basis, several team members just to check on people, right? And that's key, call the people, create a list and go through it, right? Call them and ask them how they are, and just share your thoughts of, how difficult times we're living in and what we should focus on and do, and because we have to engage a lot more with the people. I think it's key.
Absolutely. That's an amazing debate, and we would have so many more points to cover. But let's move to the last question of the show, and one of our favorite ones, which is if you would have the opportunity to meet Alexandre at the beginning of your journey at Sonae Investment Management and Bright Pixel, what advice would you offer to your younger self?
Okay, that's a tough one. I've been privileged, and and actually in these last days, I feel even more privileged by the opportunity that I had to start early on in this project of Sonae Investment Management and creating a Bright Pixel. I love what I do, and that's great. Maybe looking back, and maybe it's because of these last days. I would tell the younger Alex to think always of the scenarios that you might have in hand, and prepare for the worst, right? Just like you said previously, and map out. Take more time to map out all the scenarios. We've been evolving the project of Sonae Investment Management and Bright Pixel over time. We've changed our strategy with several tweaks along the way, but we never thought of these more once in a lifetime scenarios, right? The black swan scenarios.
Right.
And now we're feeling the need and the pain to think about that. And maybe if we had thought a little bit more about that, we wouldn't have done some investments and would have done others, right? As an investor, right? So I think that's the main lesson that I had in the last couple of days, and also another thing that I feel is the gut that we have when we, especially in early stage, that's more relevant. The gut feeling that we have that these guys have what it takes to make it happen. Mm-hmm. I'm finding out that it's quite relevant, right? And from the several discussions that we had with all the portfolio companies, the guys that we had more certainties about, around having the right trait and profiles to do what it takes, or are the ones that are coping better with this challenge that we have ahead of us. That's another lesson. Keep believing in your gut, and value what you have, right? Value a lot more what you have.
Absolutely. That's great. Alexandre, thanks so much for joining us and for accepting this challenge of being the first guest on this new season of Wartime Executives and in your case, a wartime investor. So thanks again for making the time to share your journey with us.
Miguel, thanks a lot for your invitation. I really enjoyed the conversation. Keep safe and stay strong, right?
Absolutely. And to our community, thanks for being on that side. We keep bringing you the best of the best so you can navigate these war times and get stronger and get back to scaling up as soon as possible. See you soon and stay focused.